Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Thank you all for joining. We are so excited to have our newest topic, the future of apartment marketing, which is going to be all about how you can improve your marketing for your rentals to get more qualified tenants and to do that really in a way that is looking forward. And so you're getting new tactics that maybe you haven't thought of before. And we're very excited to have Megan Cameron, who is RentPing marketing advisor there, that she is able to really hone in on how owners and property management companies can really streamline their online marketing and generate more qualified leads. And with that said, I did want to just mention a couple of things too before we hand it over to her. We do have a question box on the side of your screen. There are also a couple of handouts that Megan has provided that are pretty awesome. So one of them is this presentation, and the other one is actually a free ebook. So feel free to download that if you see it. If you don't see it or you can't download it, let me know after the presentation. We're probably going to email it to you anyway, so you should be okay. Other thing too is we're going to have this recording sent over to all of you guys in about 24 hours after the webinar, so no need to take screenshots or anything like that. We're going to send it over to you tomorrow. And with that said, I'm going to hand this over to Megan out of Lincoln, Nebraska right now. She's going to start the presentation. So take it away, Megan. Thank you for coming and doing this for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alexandra. Yeah, so this is Megan. We are kind of going to be talking a little bit here about what the apartment marketing approach has looked like historically, and really how that has changed fundamentally over the last 5 to 10 years, and what you guys can do as apartment owners and people who are actively trying to continue to get more qualified traffic. There's some different tools available to you and strategies that you can utilize to really make the most of your own in-house presence and your own in-house marketing when it comes to the online side of things. So you don't necessarily have to rely as heavily on things such as listing services or more things like print media. So to kind of jump in here, historically what the industry's philosophy has looked like when it comes to marketing apartment communities is that traffic equals leads. It's kind of the billboard philosophy. If you get more eyes on you, the more people are going to end up contacting you. So that means you may advertise everywhere, different listing services, pamphlets, handouts, things like that. You'll likely end up building your own website, find some pictures of your community, and really kind of go through a cycle where you may be updating that content every 3 to 4 years, and really hoping that by having such a breadth of visibility that somebody is going to stick their hand up and say, hey, I want to live at your community. But really there's been a pretty big shift, especially as it relates to the presence of Google, that people really are starting their search for literally just about anything on that platform. And it's very critical that you are owning your own online presence so you can make the most of people who are looking for exactly what you have to offer. And so with all of that in mind, that really is RentPing's philosophy. RentPing is the company that I work for, and essentially what we do is we are a multifamily specific marketing firm, and our whole goal is to partner with typically small to medium-sized management companies to help them build up their own in-house marketing. And so our philosophy, which we really feel like applies to the entire industry, is that people already want to live at your community, but our goal is to help make it incredibly easy for them to realize it. And that really does come into two key components that we're really going to dig into today. And you can see that here on the screen. That's targeted traffic and web engagement. And so when we look at that as more of an equation of sorts, it's targeted traffic times web engagement equals qualified leads. And when we stop to think about this, if you have great traffic, people who are looking for exactly what you have to offer, the location of your community, your pet policy, the price range, your amenities, and you're getting them and you're taking them to a website where they're not able to determine if there's a floor plan that works for them, or if this property is going to end up working at all, that doesn't really do any good because they're not able to convert on your website. But on the flip side, if you have a highly engaging website with floor plan specific information and a lot for them to qualify themselves on, however, no one can find your website, that also doesn't really do you any good either. So those are really two key components to getting qualified leads. The whole goal of all of this, especially as people nowadays are more interested in being able to gather and do as much research on their own before having to actually engage with a person, we want to make sure that we're providing them with all the tools that they need to make a decision. So by the time they actually do contact your community, they're going to be a lot further down in that leasing process. And so to kind of dig in on the first part of this equation, which is the targeted traffic component, as I mentioned, a major piece of this is your presence within Google. Now, we do have other platforms, search platforms such as Bing and Yahoo, but what we found is that roughly 70% of people shopping for an apartment are starting on Google. And so if you were going to do anything as to kind of improve your own online presence, we certainly would recommend starting on Google and making sure your presence is extremely strong there. And obviously, most of us are pretty familiar with Google. We tend to use it for all sorts of different things, but thought it would be helpful to kind of break down what a search results page for Google actually contains. And if you see this here, we have three sections to consider and three sections that we really need to be owning. The first is local, which is on the right-hand side. And then we have the organic, free, unpaid traffic results, which is essentially what Google decides with their algorithms in the back end. And finally, the paid traffic through Google AdWords. We're going to actually dig into each of these three sections. So we'll start with the local component here. Now, local search, this kind of card that appears, so if someone searches for one of your communities by name, for example, this kind of local card appears. This is coming from your Google My Business page. And so that would be a fundamental thing, is that if you do not have your own Google My Business page claimed and verified for your community, it's likely that this card may not even appear. But the benefit of having this is that very quickly, especially on mobile devices, will give people key information about your location, a glimpse into what the property looks like with the photos there, and then also will help provide your name, address, phone number, and hours, as well as reviews. And we are a very review-based type of group of people these days, and so that's another component that we'll talk about here in a second. But here's an example of a community where they may not have necessarily built out their Google My Business page entirely. Now, Google is smart. They have a lot of information, and so a lot of times they will be able to pull information from other listings, other websites on Google to create a card like this. But you can see there's a couple things that are missing. For example, on the right here for the Heights Montgomery, it doesn't show their office hours. Also, there aren't any reviews. And so by claiming and verifying your page, there are some updates we would certainly recommend making in order for it to be kind of more filled out in a way. So it's kind of another example. I just wanted to show you guys what a search result oftentimes looks like on mobile. It is very, very prominent, and so this is once again a critical reason why it's important to make sure you personally or a vendor that you may be partnered with has control over this, so you can really control what is displayed there in terms of your basic information. So, you know, here's kind of an example of the search page with that local section after it's been cleaned up a little bit. You'll notice even with the title of the listing, it says the Heights Montgomery Apartments. You're going to want to include that in the title because that helps Google to recognize, you know, what it is that you have to offer. But even more so, you'll notice now the listing has hours listed here. And the only way that Google allows apartment communities to show their office hours here on the search results page within the Google My Business section is to set the category of your Google My Business page to apartment rental agency. There's a bunch of different categories. There's apartment building, apartment complex, there's real estate, there's all these different options, but for some reason it hasn't quite caught on with Google yet that those are the same thing essentially. But for you to have your hours displayed for your clubhouse in the search results, you certainly will need to make sure that you set that category to apartment rental agency, which you can see right below here on the reviews. The other component to this is to make sure that you are responding to reviews as they come in. Oftentimes people will shy away from it because they don't want to, have an emotional reaction to something that maybe someone posted on your site. But what people are looking for is that the ownership of the community, the management of a community cares about their online reputation. Because we understand that there's going to be people who are going to give you 1-star reviews, and they're going to get on their soapbox and talk about, oh, I got evicted, it wasn't fair, or whatever it may be. That's always happens, especially in this industry. But more often than not these days, people can decipher the difference between reviews that may be a little bit on the what I'll call the crazy side, and what may be more kind of accurate and helpful reviews. But above all, if it's a positive or a negative review, the best thing that you can do to help your own presence is to respond to those reviews. And this isn't about finding places where we can put blame on others. It really is to show that you care about that online reputation. And so that is all, once again, through the Google My Business page. You would need to have the ownership access to your page in order to be able to respond to those reviews. And so when we do clean things up in that way, especially if you do use Google AdWords, you can even see here on the mobile version, it looks very, very clean as well. We'll dig into AdWords here in a little bit as well. But in terms of best practices for Google My Business, to kind of reiterate that there, setting the category within the page to apartment rental agency will allow those office hours to display. Second here, we want to make sure that we're responding to all reviews, both positive and negative. And the third piece, and this is actually quite new within the last few months, Google rolled out a new component to the Google My Business platform that's called Google Posts. And what this allows you to do is to create temporary content that appears right in that local card. And I have a kind of a screenshot here up on the screen right now for community that we work with called View Kingsland Apartments. They're down in Houston. And you see on to the right that they've got the apartment rental agency, their arrows are showing, they have reviews, high quality visual content there as well. But just below that, kind of that highlighted section, this is a great opportunity for you to make people aware of either, maybe resident events or concessions that you may be offering, different things like that right within the search results page, when you can actually have these linked to specific pages on your website or an article that may be relevant to your community to really capture people even right here. Now, I would recommend when you're doing this, when you're using Google Posts, to use some sort of an image, because if you see here, that red up to 2 months free banner is extremely prominent. You actually are able to do posts that don't have any images, but if we only had text on there, you could see that it would actually likely get lost there. So we recommend being pretty aggressive in your design to make sure that it's visible and it's noticed. And so once again, that's another component of the back end of Google My Business, that if you were to claim and verify that page, you can create posts that are temporary and you can switch those out as needed. So that's really the first section there of that search results page, is the local. And the next component is the organic search results. And this is the free unpaid traffic with Google that is determined by kind of the keywords that are being searched by an individual, but also what would be the most relevant content to display for those search results. And so the thing with organic traffic or search engine optimization kind of strategies is that there are a ton of different components that go into your success of this. It used to be where you could kind of do some tricks of the trade in the back end and load a site with a bunch of keywords to have you rank higher for apartments in Anaheim, California, or whatever it is. But now Google has a lot of things in place that will actually ding you and not make it possible for you to get ahead by doing little shortcuts. And so there's a lot of different components, including your page speed, if your site's mobile friendly, if you have security in place, an SSL certificate, title tags, keywords, all sorts of things. And so what's important is to make sure that you are doing your best to have all of those pieces working together so that over time, Google will see your community as a relevant search result for some of those broader search terms. But what we don't want to do is to kind of go about that what I'll call the old-fashioned way, which is to try to kind of abuse Google. And so something that we've developed here at RentPing, which is a link that we'll end up sending you here today after the webinar, is what we call our site score tool. And so this is available on rentping.com. You'd see it right there on the home page. But it's a free tool that allows you to enter your community's name, the location of the property, as well as a link to your website. And what this does is it essentially gives you a diagnostic report of how your website is performing. And this looks at things like actual load speed according to Google standards, if you have appropriate title tags and keywords in place, and it will also look at how your website does or does not match content within the local search results of Google, as well as looking at things like security, if your site's secure or not. So definitely would encourage you to take a look at this for your own community websites to see outright, where are the places that you can make changes or make adjustments to improve your organic side of things when it comes to your website's performance. So once again, we'll send you a link to that tool, but if you happen to pop onto rentping.com, there's a banner there up at the top that would allow you to get your own report. So hopefully you find that helpful as you're kind of analyzing your own web presence. And something that's kind of fun also to do is, if you're curious, you can even run competitors' websites too to kind of see how their web presence stacks up against your own too. So, and that is really kind of a long-term play, is what we say with organic traffic, because you have to put all these pieces into place. But it doesn't mean that if you do all those great things that your brand new website that you just launched last month all of a sudden is going to show up at the top of the search results for a broad term. It absolutely takes time. And so if you happen to be in a situation where you have a community that is in immediate need of traffic, and you just had maybe 30 units go unnoticed, and you really need to ramp things up now, SEO is not necessarily the way that you're going to generate the traffic you need today. That is where paid traffic can be a huge, huge advantage for you. And so to kind of talk a little bit about RentPing's philosophy for this, we kind of like to think of it as a bullseye, which you can see here on the screen. Most people, when they think of generating paid traffic, they immediately think of doing things like showing up for a broad search like apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina. But when we stop to think about that, people who are typing in apartments in in Charlotte, North Carolina, they don't necessarily even know what they're actually looking for yet. They haven't determined or told Google if they're looking for a specific bed bath configuration, if they're looking for something that's pet friendly, what neighborhood they want to be in. We know very, very little about these people. And so if you were to set up AdWords campaigns to have your community show up in the search results for those types of search queries, oftentimes if they do come onto your website, they're not going to be very qualified. They'll probably bounce off the site pretty quick because it's just not, they're not that down deep into their search yet. On the flip side of that too, we have to consider that people that are typing in apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina are likely going to end up seeing a bunch of ads for listing services, because we are competing then with listing service AdWords budgets. And so no single community, to my knowledge, is going to be able to, on a relatively small AdWords budget, be able to beat out a large listing service like apartments.com or any of the other ones for these broad searches, simply because they have more money and there is a little bit of an increased relevancy there. And so instead of starting with the broadest, we actually kind of flip that on its head and would recommend a community to actually start by having ads show up when someone is searching for them by name. Those are your warmest leads, people who are already looking for you. And it may seem counterintuitive. You would say, well, Megan, why would you do that? They're already going to find me through my Google My Business page and through my organic listings. But we have to remember that it's possible for up to 4 ads to show up in the search results above the organic listings. This example I have only shows 1 ad actually, but we encourage communities that we work with to essentially defend your own name, because it's possible for listing services, depending on what package you're on, listing services will use your keywords to get them onto a listing site, so not your own community site. So you're losing out on people who wanted to actually see your website. But also you can have competitors who may use your keywords to bait them onto a site other than your own. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure the people who are looking for you are actually able to find you. So that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit there, but it's critical. So if you are going to delve into approaching AdWords, we always recommend setting up an AdWords campaign to target your own community's name. And so this is kind of what that looks like even on mobile. You see I search for the community, and even above that Google My Business card there with the blue strip across, above that is an ad. And so it's a very, very critical piece of real estate on Google that is important for a community to own, to really have the 3 different components showing content for your own community. So that's what we would start with, but we understand that you also want to broaden your reach to people who didn't know that you existed yet. And a great way to do that is actually by targeting your competitors' names, because instead of targeting people looking for a broad term search like apartments in Charlotte, when we target competitors by name, this essentially allows you to show up in the search results for people who are looking for apartment communities maybe down the street from you that offer similar price range, pet policy, floor plans, that type of thing. So it really allows you to get in front of folks who are going to be a lot more likely to convert once they do come onto your website. And so an example of this here is a search for Sunridge Apartments in Lincoln, Nebraska. So this individual was searching for that particular community, but if you notice, even before you can see anything about Sunridge down in the organic, there's these 4 ads that appear above. And a community that we work with is actually Timberline Apartments. So we have a campaign set up that if you are searching for Sunridge, one of their competitors, an ad for Timberline shows up. And it's pretty amazing to see how people will search for one thing, but then are easily able to go on to a search for something else because it's relevant. We address the fact that this community is also in North Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's a call to action about watching walkthrough video tours within there. It's a very, very powerful way to get people who are looking for something similar. So that's another example here is on mobile. It's huge. I mean, when you have such a small screen to work with, when you do target your competitors like this, you actually may be the only thing that they see even before they scroll down. So it's a pretty neat way to execute that. Now, beyond that, though, we have communities that we partner with that are in more of like lease-up scenarios where they're trying to go from 0% occupied all the way up to, 95 or whatever their goals may be. Beyond doing competitor targeting, there's still kind of a middle ground where instead of jumping to that broad search, you can still do things like setting up campaigns for people looking for pet-friendly apartments or luxury or new or senior or affordable, whatever is kind of the keyword qualifier for your community is something that you can also set up campaigns to do. And that's another example here, Regalia Bellaterra in Katy. When you search for luxury apartments in Katy, Texas, they're the ones that show up above several other communities as well. So kind of recommend that almost like a tiered approach, where instead of trying to go 0 to 60 and show up for your broadest searches, start by getting the most qualified traffic and work your way out on that bullseye. And kind of a different component here is remarketing, and that is something that pretty much anyone who accesses the internet is going to run into. So these are picture ads actually that display to people after they've left your website. So the goal of this is that regardless of how somebody comes onto your website, it is critical that you get back in front of them, because we understand that when someone is searching for their next place to live, they're not necessarily just looking at you. They're likely looking at you and a lot of competitors around you. And so it's very important for you to show up over and over again back in front of them to remind them of that apartment search, number one, but more specifically to remind them of you. And a way that you can do that is by creating and using Google's display network component of AdWords, where when someone comes onto your website, they get cookied just like they do everywhere else on the internet. And so for whatever period you set after that, they would see picture ads for your property. So here's an example. I was on weatherchannel.com, and down in the bottom right-hand corners, you can see that before, in the last 30 days, I was on Chateau Development site, and now I'm seeing picture ads. And this is subtle. Oftentimes people don't even realize that they're seeing them, but it builds that trust, that brand awareness that is kind of like your re-engagement component to get them back. And what we found is people who visit the site by clicking on one of those remarketing ads, they tend to stay on the site even longer than they did the first time, because they're already familiar with you, and they may be digging even deeper into that search. So that's another component that is kind of the back end of it. But if you use Amazon, I'm sure you probably have seen these before. If you don't purchase something, it's just sitting in your cart, they are going to show that product to you over and over again, likely until you do purchase it. So it's kind of the same logic there. Now, another piece of this beyond Google, so that was kind of how we would recommend approaching Google to really capitalize on your own web presence. But Craigslist is another great way to generate more traffic to your website. We don't necessarily see Craigslist as an actual advertising source, simply because it works in varying degrees in different markets, but it is free. There are some places where it's not, but in most markets, it's a free tool where you can essentially create posts to get people off of Craigslist, where you are listed up against your competitors, and onto your website. So when using Craigslist, we want to make sure that we're creating floor plan specific posts instead of creating posts that are about your entire community. At the end of the day, when people are on Craigslist, they want to find the actual unit that they are going to move into. And so that's kind of something that we would recommend, is when you are doing Craigslist posting, to make sure it is floor plan specific, and that you have floor plan specific visual content, because if you do not have any visual content on a Craigslist post, the likelihood of it getting engaged with is slim to none. So there's a lot more information when it comes to Craigslist posting schedules, and making sure that you're using the most of it without abusing Craigslist terms of use. We oftentimes see people getting their ads green ghosted or accounts shut down due to overposting or having spammy content. So if you have questions on how to make the most of Craigslist, certainly let me know. We've got quite a bit of resources there for you too. So that's kind of another additional component that we see kind of helps to fill out your overall in-house marketing approach. And that's really the first half of the equation, though, is the traffic generation. But we need to make sure that all this traffic is going to a website where people are going to actually know, yes, I want to live here, or no, I don't. It's okay for people to disqualify themselves on your website, because what that means is that your leasing staff is not having to disqualify them on the phone. The traffic that they are talking to, the people that they are talking to, are a lot more qualified. And so having a website that really helps and kind of build out that understanding if it's going to be a good fit or not is huge. And so what's critical here, there's a couple things, and we're just going to kind of talk about your best practices, because we understand that there's a lot of different vendors out there that do websites. You may be working with a big multifamily specific company, or you may be working with a local kind of boutique type of website provider. But really there are some best practices for the multifamily industry. And the first one of that is critical is having floor plan specific website pages. So it kind of depends on your setup. If you're a community that has, or you own a community, I should say, that has 10 different floor plans, you would want to have 10 different pages. But say you have more of a type of a setup where you have 119 units and they're all unique. That's when you get into a situation where you want to have more representative types of floor plans, because there is such a thing as paralysis of choice, where you really don't want to have 119 floor plan pages. So we have to use this with this logic with discretion, but having key information on a floor plan page is a must. And this is kind of a shift from the past. It used to be where you could say call for pricing, and that is supposed to encourage people to then contact you so your leasing staff could then close them. But now it's really important for you to list it, because if you don't, there's a bunch of other communities that will list it and will likely get that person's business. And so floor plan specific photos and videos, if you're able to, is huge, especially if you're looking to get people from out of town. The rent range, instead of putting a starting at price, having the high and the low price together really helps people to know if it's going to work for their budget, deposit, pet policy, that type of information. And you still do want to have a list of community amenities and photos, but that needs to be separate from your floor plan pages, because oftentimes we see in our industry that people will have a photo gallery page on their website, and it'll have pictures of the clubhouse, and it'll have pictures of some random kitchen and a random living room, and people don't know what unit that represents. It can be very confusing. So having that separated out also helps to clarify for your prospective residents what they would actually get if they were to live at your community. That's kind of what I wrote here with this quote, is what is the kitchen? What kitchen is this a picture of? That is oftentimes what we see in our industry is random shots, and it's simply not helpful. So the other component is also not utilizing stock photography. I mean, we do encourage to have some sort of lifestyle photos throughout in certain instances, but when it comes down to it, what people care about is the actual unit that they're going to live in, what the kitchen countertops look like, what the bathroom looks like, if there's a pool or not, versus seeing pictures of, you know, families with little puppies. That's not necessarily helpful information. We always come back to, is the information you're providing helpful or not? And finally, it's important to invest in high quality visual content. That is really something that can make or break you, because if you don't have any visual content that's specific to your community, it's really hard to develop trust with people who are coming to your website. And so this is a critical component to invest in having a photographer come out to your community and to capture photos both of your floor plans and of your community as a whole, but also making sure that those files aren't so huge that it's slowing down your website. So there is some components that need to go on the back end to make sure your site isn't affected or slowed down by huge files. So yeah, so that's kind of the approach to the web engagement side of things. And really what all of this needs to do is to work together, and you do need to be doing some sort of tracking, because if you're doing all these pieces and you have no idea what's working and what's not, you kind of have to say to yourself, what's the point? And so utilizing any sort of tracking platform that you can access, we personally do this for the clients that we work with, is providing them with both tracking phone numbers and email addresses for all of their listing services, as well as the information that's on your own website. But then also utilizing Google Analytics, because there's so much powerful information about knowing what people are doing on your website. Google Analytics is free, so it would definitely be worth checking with your web developer for your community websites to verify that they are using Google Analytics and that they're tracking that with the code on your website. That's kind of the critical component to pull all this together. So yeah, so to kind of zoom out, you know, we always want to make sure that we're doing all these little things that they're working together, but there's key things that you can do even today in Google My Business, with Craigslist, and even with your own visual content that can make a serious impact pretty immediately. And some of the resources that Alexandra mentioned there that you'll have access to, we shared the Ultimate Guide to Apartment Marketing with you. It's an ebook that kind of covers a lot of what we discussed here today too, so it might be helpful to read through that as well. So that's kind of all I had for our discussion here, but I know we have an opportunity for questions, so I think I'll hand it back over to you, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. That was really in-depth, so a lot of information there. I already have a couple of questions that came in. For those of you who haven't asked your questions, you can certainly enter them in the box. I'm going to get started with the few that we have. So the first one is how can I measure if my SEO efforts are working? But I think you just answered that right now. This was asked earlier in the presentation. So I guess it would be, how can I tell if it's going well for SEO?
Yeah, no, so I think there's kind of a two-part answer to that. Number one is making sure that you have the various components that Google sees to be extremely critical in place. That would actually be a really, really great tool to use, that site score report on rentping.com, because that's more that diagnostic check to see what's in place and what's not. So that's kind of more on the functional side of things. But when it comes to performance, yes, having Google Analytics tracking is critical, but also being able to track where your leases are coming from, because at the end of the day, our whole web presence comes back to, is it helping me make more money or not? And so we could get all of the leads in the world, but if none of those leads go anywhere, it doesn't matter. And so we here at Renting, we do have a lease tracking software which allows you to tie back phone calls and emails to specific ad sources, including, Craigslist, AdWords, your local card there with tracking phone numbers, so you can see that. So that's kind of what we discovered was a missing component in our industry, was being able to actually track that. And so some of that exists with different vendors, but when it comes down to it, if that's not something that's possible for you, or you're not necessarily interested in the performance side, at least doing the site score tool there on rentping.com will help you know immediately what are things that I can talk to my web developer about improving. So definitely recommend checking that out.
Okay, awesome. And then another one is about Google Ads, which is how often Google Ads should be updated, the ad content itself, and also how many, what kind of a variety of Google Ads should I test out at one time?
Great question. Yeah. So when it comes to AdWords, it really is about I should say what we shouldn't do is just set it and forget it, because performance for different markets varies greatly. And so typically what we found works best is if you're going to have a campaign. So say you're doing a defensive campaign where you're targeting people who are looking for you by name. We usually would recommend having four different ad variances there, so you can kind of see which of those get engaged with the most. And within those four ad variances, you always are going to want to include key information like your community's name, where you're located, but the differences is going to come more with the call to action. So there's keywords that are really, really important in our industry, which is if you do happen to have any specials or concessions, kind of mixing up your ad text to involve those, but then also using phrases like watch video tours or see photos, or things that are actionable, so it takes people off of the search results so they know that there's something to do there. But when it comes to actually changing out kind of what you're targeting, that honestly would be more of an approach where you would need to see, okay, what's working and what's not. And so when you link AdWords, you can link AdWords to Google Analytics. You can see how many times people bounced off of the ads if they left the website, how long they stayed on the site. And you can also actually set up conversions. You can set up call conversions and email conversions, so you know, okay, this person came in from this campaign, this is what percentage actually called or emailed. That would be what we would determine, kind of what's working and what's not. And so if there was campaigns that were not performing well, we would recommend pausing those and putting more money into campaigns that are performing. But so that really does require you to integrate your analytics and your AdWords accounts together there.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the last question I have here, unless we get another, is going to be, I have Yelp reviews, but no Google reviews yet. So when somebody wants to leave a review, should I tell them to go to both or just one or the other? Which one is better? Because I guess they don't have any Google reviews just yet.
Gotcha. So that is a question that actually comes up here on our side quite a bit. So great question there. To be honest with you, the most prominent results that you're going to see when it comes to reviews is Google. So we definitely would recommend to have residents who have had a really positive experience with you to post a Google review. But the unfortunate part about Google is that they actually make you have a Google account to be able to leave a review. And so that typically makes it a little bit more difficult for people who had a positive experience to actually leave you a review, because it's kind of, they have to jump through some hoops, versus Yelp, it's a lot more straightforward and they don't have to create an email account. But you may notice on different platforms, but on Google especially, they will pull in average review ratings from others. So it's great that you're getting posts from Yelp, because that actually will show up on that local card, as well as apartment ratings and some various other ones. But we have to be really, really careful with Google and with Yelp especially, because it is actually against both of those companies' terms of use to incentivize people for reviews. So we've actually seen it where if say you had a new resident that moved in and you said, hey, I'm going to give you a $5 gift card if you leave a review, I would not recommend doing that, because we've seen it on Yelp, especially with restaurants actually, where if somebody is caught by Yelp for incentivizing reviews, a pop-up actually comes up on the screen before somebody can access their page, and it will say, hey, this company was caught, and trying to incentivize reviews, so be careful about what you read. Like, it will actually tell you as a user that this company or this restaurant or apartment community was incentivizing. So we have to make sure that it happens organically. And so if someone comes into your office and talks to your leasing staff about what a great experience that they've had, it would be a natural time to mention that and to maybe send them a link about where they can go to leave reviews. But we do not want to get into the territory where we're giving incentives. So, but overall, I would definitely recommend your team to steer people towards Google, simply because that is going to be more prominent for the vast majority of people looking for you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've actually never seen that message pop up, but I've definitely had businesses ask me to leave a review and get a free whatever or a $5 gift card. That's interesting. Like so many. Okay, great. So in regards to that, just a follow-up to it, someone else asked, how do they find out that they're incentivized? How do they know that? And he also put, we never had a lot of reviews and we want to start polling our clients. How does organically happen? So I'm not sure if I understand that 100%. I think he means, well, first, how do they find out they're incentivized, and then they're going to poll their clients, and how do we maybe get organic reviews? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, so when it comes to the first part of that, that is actually a great question that I unfortunately do not know the answer to. I'm not entirely sure. I think it may have to do with kind of some of the behavior they see. If they maybe see I'm sure they have algorithms that catch this, but if there's like an influx of a lot of 5-star reviews with very little content in them, that happens frequently, that may be kind of a flag within Yelp's system that causes them to question. So I do not know the back end workings of that, but it is something where we just have to be careful that we're not actually incentivizing, so you're covered. But to get organic reviews, I mean, really what it comes down to is providing a really great experience for people, and making sure that that's always kind of on your property manager's minds and your leasing staff's minds. I mean, even creating materials that exist within your office that kind of reinforce that. So if you happen to have like a resident event or something, You could also have an opportunity for people to leave reviews even at those times, but there really isn't a way to generate them in a non-organic way, because Google's whole goal is to show people relevant, helpful information. And even when you see on the local card within the search results for a given property, sometimes we'll actually pull in reviews into the search card where it has maybe like a quote here, a quote there from random ones. That's actually also something that us as Google My Business page owners, we cannot control that either. Google determines that. And so that's why it really comes back to, if you do start to get those reviews coming in, to make sure you're responding to every single one of them, even if they're a 5-star or positive, because if you do happen to have say a negative review come up within the little local card there on the right-hand side of your search results page, the most important thing that a prospective resident would want to see is that apartment community cared about their reputation to follow up and to make things right. And so there's actually a lot of Google kind of best practices that they even list out. You literally could search Google My Business reviews best practices, and there are some notes there. But the main goal with responding to reviews is to be clear and concise and to not argue with them. So most often if there's a problem within a review, we would recommend saying, hey, I'm so sorry you experienced this, whatever it may be, and then say, I would be happy to discuss this in detail with you in office. Here's my contact information. So instead of trying to solve the problem right there in the review, simply showing that you want to continue the conversation is really the best approach there, without getting into kind of an argumentative style.
Right, I agree. I've seen those arguments between owners, and it's actually kind of funny sometimes, but not good for business, that's for sure. So definitely really just comes down to first having a really good customer service and experience, and then showcasing it online and letting people know about it. That's the whole point. And so I think
Absolutely.
all your tips are really just driving to that. And this is really helpful, I think, for everyone here who attended. And we're going to be sharing, like I said, all of our recording tomorrow, and providing ebook that was mentioned, and also a couple of the links that were referenced. So Megan, with that said, I really appreciate you coming on to the call. We love having someone with your expertise on, and so we're going to be sharing your contact info if that's okay with everyone too, so you can reach out if they have any other questions.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, and definitely reach out if you have questions. That's really our whole goal, is to help owners of communities and management companies to make sure that they're able to really have a control of their own online presence. So appreciate the time, Alexandra, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day here.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.